So behind me here in Babylon is the place where the ziggurat of Babylon stood. We have here a great example of a ziggurat in Mesopotamia.
For decades, historians believed they understood Babylon. They believed its greatness was about size, wealth, and power. Then excavations went deeper. Beneath the streets, beneath the walls, researchers found systems that should not have been there.
How the hell 6,000, 5,000 years ago, do they know that?
Yeah.
And what explanations do we have? Like, what's the conventional explanations?
They were not symbolic. They were not accidental. They worked together. What was uncovered does not just add details to history. It directly challenges how human progress has been explained for generations. The historical story everyone was taught. Long before archaeologists uncovered anything beneath Babylon, a clear story about human history was already accepted as truth. This story said that human progress moved slowly and in one direction only. First came stone tools, then simple metal tools. Much later came science, machines, and complex systems. According to this view, every major breakthrough happened once and stayed forever. Knowledge was believed to only move forward, never backward. Within this model, ancient societies were praised mainly for their labor, not for their thinking. Historians assumed that ancient builders followed inherited methods rather than understanding why those methods worked. When large buildings were constructed, the success was explained as the result of many workers, strict organization, and long experience, not careful calculation or technical planning. The buildings themselves were admired, but the people who made them were not credited with knowing the principles that made those structures stable and functional. This way of thinking placed human intelligence in very specific periods of history. Ancient Greece was presented as the moment when people first began to think logically and systematically. Rome was described as a society that applied those ideas through law, engineering, and administration. Civilizations that existed before Greece were not treated as sources of new ideas. They were described as early stages that only prepared the ground for later achievements. Societies outside this path were often reduced to roles as providers of labor, resources, or simple techniques, rather than creators of original knowledge. Over time, this ranking became so familiar that it was accepted without question and used as the default framework for studying the ancient world. Because of this framework, ancient technology was interpreted in a very narrow way. If an object looked complex, historians often assumed the people who made it did not understand how it worked. They were said to have arrived at solutions by repeated trial, copying earlier examples without knowing the reasons behind them. Another belief followed naturally from this. Complexity was linked to modern science. Precision was linked to written mathematics. If a society did not leave behind formulas, diagrams, or formal texts, it was assumed they could not plan with accuracy. If written explanations were missing, understanding was assumed to be missing as well. The lack of familiar evidence was treated as proof that advanced thinking did not exist. Archaeological practice adjusted to protect this model. When tools were found that did not match the expected level of technology, they were often labeled ceremonial objects. If a tool could not be easily explained as practical, it was described as religious. If a structure showed unusual precision, it was called symbolic rather than functional. These labels allowed researchers to avoid changing the larger timeline. This approach also left no room for loss of knowledge. Societal collapse was explained through war, famine, or politics, but not through the disappearance of technical understanding. The idea that a civilization could master certain skills and later forget them was rarely considered. Progress was treated as permanent, even when ruins suggested otherwise. Babylon was interpreted through this same lens for decades. Archaeologists studied its size, its walls, and its myths. They described its power and wealth, but its people were still seen as rulers and laborers, not engineers or system builders. The assumption was already fixed before deeper evidence came to light. Once this model was fully accepted, Anything that contradicted it was not allowed to reshape history. It was marked as an exception, explained away, and placed at the edges of discussion, where it could not threaten the story itself. The anomalies that would not go away. As excavations expanded in the 19th century, archaeologists began encountering objects that did not sit comfortably within accepted timelines. These were not dramatic discoveries announced with fanfare. They were small, technical, and often inconvenient. A tool that seemed too precise, a surface cut too cleanly, a material used in a way that appeared unnecessary for a so-called simple society. Drill holes cut into diorite, one of the hardest stones known, showed levels of precision that normally require tools harder than bronze, yet these holes appeared in layers dated to periods before iron tools were believed to exist. At first, these finds did not cause alarm. They caused irritation. According to excavation reports from that period, many of these objects were documented carefully and then set aside. They were described in footnotes, appendix pages, or separate papers that never changed the main story. The reasoning was simple. One strange object could always be explained away. It could be an import from a later period. It could be contamination from a higher layer. It could be a misinterpretation by the excavator. The timeline itself was not questioned. When dates did not align, dating was blamed. Stratigraphy was said to be disturbed. Layers were described as mixed. The idea that ancient people might have been more capable than assumed was rarely considered. It felt safer to assume an error in measurement than an error in history. This approach became common practice. It kept the larger framework stable. What began to change was not the nature of the finds, but their number. Reports from different regions started showing similar problems. In one place, tools appeared too advanced for their layer. In another, construction methods seemed unnecessarily precise. Elsewhere, materials were used in ways that did not match their supposed purpose. Each case was treated separately, but together they formed a pattern that became harder to ignore. The real problem was repetition. When the same type of anomaly appears once, it can be dismissed. When it appears again, it raises questions. When it appears across multiple sites, cultures, and decades of excavation, it becomes uncomfortable. The mistake explanation begins to lose strength. It does not collapse, but it weakens. No single discovery forced a crisis. There was no moment when the academic world stopped and admitted something was wrong. Instead, tension built slowly. Some researchers began to express concern in private letters and conference discussions. Others published cautious papers that asked narrow questions without challenging the full model. There was hesitation, not rebellion. Curiosity mixed with worry. This discomfort was visible in how language changed. Words like unusual, puzzling, or unexpected began appearing more often in reports. Explanations became longer and more complex. Simple answers were no longer enough. Still, the overall structure of history remained untouched. The anomalies were treated as noise around a stable signal. As more data accumulated, attention began to shift. Researchers noticed that a large number of these unresolved finds came from the same broad region. Mesopotamia stood out, not because it produced the strangest single object, but because it produced many small problems that refused to disappear. Tools, materials, and construction details from different sites raised similar questions. This clustering did not yet provide answers, but it changed the mood. The issue was no longer about isolated mistakes. It was about a region whose material culture did not fully match the expectations placed on it. That realization did not overturn history, but it prepared the ground for something more serious. That clustering becomes impossible to ignore once attention turns fully to Mesopotamia and one small object found near Baghdad. Experiments, not accidents, in ancient Mesopotamia. As researchers began looking beyond isolated discoveries and started comparing patterns across regions, attention settled on a small object from the heart of ancient Mesopotamia. It came from the same river system, the same trade routes, and the same technical world that Babylon once dominated. Today, the find is referenced by the nearest modern city, Baghdad, but its origins belong to the wider Mesopotamian landscape where Babylon rose to power. The object is commonly known as the Baghdad Battery. At first glance, it looks unremarkable. It is a small clay vessel with no decoration and no obvious purpose. What drew attention was not how it looked, but how it was built. Inside the vessel sat a copper tube. At the center was an iron rod. The two metals were kept apart. The opening at the top had been sealed. This internal structure was the real surprise. According to excavation records, the placement of the copper and iron was precise. They were not simply dropped inside, they were positioned deliberately to avoid contact. Copper and iron are known to react differently when exposed to certain liquids. Some researchers later suggested that if an acidic substance had been placed inside the vessel, it could trigger a chemical reaction. This reaction would not power lamps or machines, but it could produce a small and measurable electrical charge. No serious researcher claims that ancient Mesopotamians used electricity the way we do today. There is no evidence of powered machines or lighting. What some researchers suggest is much narrower. They believe the vessel could have been used to create a small controlled reaction for specific tasks. One possible use is coating metals. Another is treating surfaces. These ideas are debated, but they come from the way the vessel is constructed. They are not guesses added later to make the object sound impressive. What makes the vessel difficult to dismiss is that it only works if several conditions are met. The metals must be arranged correctly. The liquid must have the right properties. The vessel must be sealed. If any of these elements are missing, nothing happens. This level of precision does not support the idea of random assembly. A ritual object does not need internal rules to function. This object does. Here is where discomfort enters the story. If the vessel was used for a practical purpose, then someone had to understand what it did. They may not have had equations or written theory, but they understood cause and effect. They knew that combining certain materials in a specific way produced a reliable outcome. That knowledge does not come from belief or superstition, it comes from testing. The vessel's significance extends beyond its construction. Electrochemical knowledge is traditionally traced to Luigi Galvani's experiments in 1790. If this vessel functioned as some researchers suggest, it demonstrates practical understanding of chemical reactions nearly 2,000 years earlier than previously thought. That gap does not adjust history slightly. It breaks the timeline that places experimental science exclusively in the modern world. The clay vessel matters because it fits into that pattern. It does not stand alone. It suggests that some craftsmen were not guessing. They were paying attention to results and changing their methods when those results changed. The object does not prove advanced science. It shows something simpler and more important. Ancient people were not always moving forward by accident. Once that idea settles in, the focus shifts on its own. The question stops being about one object. It turns toward everything else that was built, shaped, and arranged with the same kind of control. Engineering beneath the city. When excavators working beneath the southern palace broke through ancient foundations, they expected bedrock. Instead, they found hollow spaces, deliberate voids beneath the structure. Below those were networks of clay pipes sealed with bitumen, running in planned directions. Beneath streets, courtyards, and buildings, archaeologists began uncovering these systems. They were not loose fragments or broken channels. They were laid deliberately, following clear paths beneath walls and floors. The discovery was unsettling because these systems were not visible from above. They were built to work, not to be seen. The pipes were made from fired clay and joined with unusual care. According to excavation reports, the joints were sealed tightly using natural compounds. The seals were strong enough to prevent leaks even when water moved through the system with force. The bitumen sealant contained crushed limestone and plant fiber additives, a composite mixture that increased both flexibility and waterproofing strength. This detail matters. Simple drainage does not require pressure-resistant joints. Open channels or shallow ditches would have been enough. These pipes were designed for something more controlled. Researchers noted that the pipes were arranged in planned sequences. Water was not left to flow wherever gravity allowed. It was directed. It moved from one point to another through enclosed routes. Some pipes sloped gently, others ran horizontally for long distances. This level of control suggests that the builders understood how water behaves and planned for it in advance. This was not improvisation during construction, it was design. This system also went beyond waste removal. Drainage systems usually carry water away from buildings. These pipes did more than that. Some led toward central areas, others connected to internal spaces. According to some interpretations, they could have supplied clean water as well as removed used water. This remains debated, but the layout itself shows that water movement was managed deliberately, not treated as a nuisance. What makes these systems even more striking is where they were found. They ran beneath foundations. They were embedded into the city at its earliest stages. Once buildings were complete, these pipes were no longer accessible. That means they had to be planned before construction began. A system like this cannot be added later without tearing structures apart. This alone points to long-term thinking. The fact that these systems were hidden is important. Decorative features are meant to be seen. Ritual structures are meant to be approached. These pipes were buried and sealed. Their value was purely practical. They existed to make daily life work better. This challenges the idea that ancient cities focused only on visible grandeur. Plumbing like this also changes how the city itself must be understood. A dense population cannot survive long without reliable water management. Standing water spreads disease. Waste buildup creates health problems. Controlled water systems reduce both. Even without modern knowledge of germs, the benefits would have been obvious through experience. Cleaner spaces last longer. Healthier people work better. Cities grow. Over time, archaeologists began to see these pipes not as isolated features but as part of a wider pattern. Roads, buildings, and underground systems appeared to support one another. This was not a city that grew randomly. It was shaped with purpose. Engineering was not added on top of the city. It was built into it from the beginning. Once systems like these were placed beneath the streets, their influence did not stop there. The same thinking soon appears inside homes and workshops, where control and planning shaped everyday life in even more surprising ways. Intelligence inside daily life. Once the focus moved inside Babylonian buildings, the pattern became harder to ignore. Archaeologists were no longer dealing with pipes and foundations alone. They were finding signs of careful thinking inside ordinary rooms. These were not spaces meant to impress visitors. They were places where people lived and worked every day. In several residential areas, researchers found small glass objects that at first seemed decorative. They were flat, clear, and shaped with slight curves. According to excavation reports, when these pieces were placed over small writing, the letters appeared larger and sharper. The most documented example, discovered by Austin Henry Layard in 1849 at Nimrud, is now held in the British Museum. This rock crystal lens shows deliberate grinding to create optical magnification. This effect does not happen by accident. Magnification only works when glass is shaped with intent. Some believe these objects functioned as simple lenses. If that is true, then someone understood how light bends when it passes through curved surfaces. That understanding does not require equations, but it does require observation and testing. Tools found in workshops raised similar questions. Archaeologists uncovered blades, drills, and cutting instruments made from metal alloys that resisted corrosion. These tools did not rust easily, even after centuries underground. The choice of materials matters here. Different metals behave differently over time. According to reports, these tools were not one-offs. Similar examples appeared in multiple locations. This points to shared standards rather than individual experiments. Precision showed up in how these tools were used. Stone surfaces bore marks that were clean and consistent. Cuts followed straight paths. Holes were evenly spaced. These results suggest tools that performed predictably. Predictable results come from tools made to specific tolerances. That level of control does not appear when each object is made differently. It appears when craftsmen aim for the same outcome every time. Sound control inside buildings added another layer. In some rooms, walls were angled slightly inward. Large clay vessels were placed along edges or built into corners. According to some interpretations, these features amplified voices and reduced echo. When tested, even quiet speech carried clearly across the space. This was not decoration. It was deliberate sound shaping. The builders were adjusting space to serve a purpose. Lighting provided one of the clearest signals. In several large interior rooms, archaeologists found no soot on ceilings or walls. This absence is important. If torches or oil lamps had been used regularly, dark residue would be unavoidable. Some researchers believe the light came from outside, redirected through polished metal mirrors. According to reports, mirror fragments were found positioned in ways that could guide sunlight through corridors and into inner rooms. This would explain the clean surfaces and steady illumination. What made these discoveries more troubling was their repetition. These features did not appear in one house or one workshop. Variations of them appeared across different neighborhoods, lenses in homes, precision tools in workspaces, acoustic control in meeting areas, light management in shared buildings. The same ideas appeared again and again, adjusted to fit different needs. This repetition matters because it removes the idea of coincidence. A clever trick used once can be dismissed. A method repeated across a city cannot. These were not experiments hidden away in temples or reserved for rulers. They were part of daily life. The implication is difficult to avoid. The thinking behind these designs was shared. It moved between craftsmen, builders, and households. Knowledge was not locked behind status. It circulated through practice. This was not intelligence concentrated at the top. It was intelligence woven into how people lived. When these ideas repeat across neighborhoods, they stop being clever tricks and start becoming a system. Babylon as a coordinated machine. By the time archaeologists began comparing discoveries across different parts of Babylon, a larger pattern started to emerge. Individual solutions no longer appeared isolated. They appeared connected. What was found beneath homes, workshops, and public spaces suggested that the city functioned as a single coordinated system rather than a collection of clever ideas. One of the most striking examples came from deep vertical shafts discovered beneath buildings. These shafts descended into the ground and connected to horizontal passages. At the base of many of them, archaeologists found standing water fed by hidden channels. According to reports, the difference between the cooler conditions below and the intense surface heat above created a natural movement through the shafts. This movement reduced indoor heat without any mechanical parts. Some researchers believe this system was designed deliberately to regulate temperature inside buildings throughout the day. Evidence suggests these shafts were not empty. Layers of woven fibers, mineral fragments, and thin metal mesh were found in some openings. According to some interpretations, these materials acted as filters, trapping dust and debris before it entered living spaces. This idea remains debated, but the materials were positioned in ways that suggest a practical role rather than decoration. Clean interiors would have been easier to maintain in a dense city. This cooling approach only makes sense when viewed at the scale of the city. Narrow streets, thick walls, and shaded courtyards worked together with the underground shafts. Buildings were positioned to reduce direct heat exposure. Density was not accidental. It helped regulate temperature by limiting exposure to the sun. Urban planning and climate control were linked. Water management followed the same logic. Along canals and fields, archaeologists uncovered devices that controlled water flow automatically. These mechanisms used floats made from lightweight materials and stone counterweights. As water levels rose, the float moved and opened a gate. As levels dropped, the gate closed. According to reports, this allowed fields and gardens to be watered without constant human labor. This was not random irrigation, it was regulated. Timekeeping devices appeared alongside these systems. Stone markers, shadow measuring tools, and calibrated surfaces were found in both public and workspaces. These tools allowed people to divide the day into predictable segments. When water gates opened and closed, when workshops began work, and when public activities occurred could all be coordinated. Time was not flexible. It was measured. Chemical methods added another layer. In homes and storage areas, archaeologists found sealed containers treated with natural resins and mineral compounds. Some researchers believe these were used to preserve food and materials for long periods. The contents were protected from decay far longer than expected. This suggests an understanding of how materials change over time and how to slow that process. What makes these discoveries difficult to dismiss is how they depend on one another. Cooling systems relied on water channels. Water channels relied on regulated flow. Regulated flow relied on timing. Timing relied on shared measurement. Preservation relied on controlled environments. None of these systems worked alone. Each supported the others. This interdependence changes how Babylon must be understood. It was not a city that solved problems one at a time. It solved them together. Comfort, health, labor, and planning were linked through design. The city behaved less like a collection of buildings and more like a machine built to support daily life. At this point, the evidence no longer asks whether Babylon was advanced. It forces a much harder question: when the old story breaks, and what replaces it? By the time all these systems are placed side by side, the old explanation can no longer hold. Water control beneath the streets, cooling built into architecture, light guided through mirrors, sound shaped by rooms, tools made to fixed standards, time divided and shared, food preserved deliberately. None of this works in isolation. Each system depends on another. Together they form a single logic. This is the point where coincidence stops being a reasonable answer. For a city to function this way, knowledge had to be shared. Builders, craftsmen, planners, and workers all had to follow the same rules. Pipes had to line up with buildings. Cooling shafts had to match street layouts. Water flow had to align with timekeeping. That kind of coordination does not come from one clever individual or one generation. It requires training, repetition, and agreement over long periods of time. Knowledge had to be passed down intact. This also explains why the systems appear consistent rather than experimental. The same approaches appear again and again, adjusted for different spaces but following the same principles. That suggests standard methods, not trial and error. People were not guessing every time they built. They were applying known solutions. Babylon was not testing ideas to see if they might work. It was using ideas that already worked. At this stage, Babylon can no longer be described as a simple stepping stone between primitive life and modern civilization. It does not fit that role. The city shows signs of being a complete technological culture in its own right. Its solutions were suited to its environment, its climate, and its scale. They were not rough beginnings of something better. They were effective answers to real problems. This realization forces a difficult shift. If Babylon functioned at this level, then history cannot be a straight line of constant improvement. It must include decline. Knowledge can be lost. Skills can disappear. Systems that took centuries to refine can vanish in a few generations. According to some historians, conquest and collapse do more than destroy buildings. They break chains of learning. When specialists are killed or displaced, their knowledge goes with them. Later societies often reused what was left. Stones were taken from old walls. Canals were cleared and reused. Foundations were built on top of older foundations. But using something is not the same as understanding it. Without the original training and context, the reasoning behind these systems faded. Over time, what remained looked impressive but mysterious. Written records alone were not enough to preserve this knowledge. Much of what made these systems work was practical. It lived in habits, measurements, and routines. Once daily use stopped, the knowledge became hard to recover. Instructions without practice lose meaning. Diagrams without experience become symbols. This changes how ancient people must be seen. They were not waiting for modern science to arrive. They were solving problems with the tools and materials available to them. They observed patterns. They tested outcomes. They refined methods. Their intelligence was applied, not abstract. It also challenges the idea that the modern world is unique. Many solutions we consider modern respond to the same needs Babylon faced: clean water, stable food supply, comfortable living spaces, organized time. The difference is not intelligence, it is continuity. History seen this way is not a smooth climb upward. It is uneven. It rises, breaks, and rises again. Babylon represents one of those high points. Its ruins do not show a failed beginning. They show a complete system that once worked and was later forgotten. What was found under Babylon does not tell us that ancient people were magical or advanced beyond reason. It tells us something more unsettling. We are not the first to build a complex world. We are only the latest to rediscover how fragile knowledge can be. If you enjoyed watching this video, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel.